Hi friends, Krista here. Thanks so much for stopping by Books and Jams. I am here today to talk about all of the books that I read in the month of January. January started out a little bit on the slow side, which is why I did not do a mid-month wrap-up. At the midpoint part of January, I had finished a few things, but 3 of them were for my Read Like Chloe vlog, and I didn't want to talk about them in my mid-month wrap-up as well. So I only had 2 other things. So I just decided not to do a mid-month wrap-up, but now I have 13 books to talk about. I actually only have 10 because I am not going to go over the books that I read for my Read Like a BookTube Friend project. I did Read Like Chloe from Always Booked for January, and I read These Things Hidden by Heather Gutenkopf, Happiness for Beginners by Catherine Center, and The Courage Tree by Diane Chamberlain. And I talked quite a bit about all 3 of these books in my vlog where I Read Like Chloe. So if you're interested in more of my thoughts about these ones, I will link that video down below, but I'm not going to talk about them here. Just know they were read in the month of January. Now let's just dive into the rest of the books. I started the year with a carryover book. I had started reading Anne of Green Gables at the end of last year, and while it is nice to start a new year with a clean slate and kind of start fresh, it also doesn't matter if I'm carrying something over. And I feel like if I am going to carry over a book, why not let it be Anne? Because she's fabulous. Anne of Green Gables is by Ellen Montgomery. It's a children's classic. It is an 8-book series. I do not plan at this point to read through the whole series. I just wanted to revisit Anne of Green Gables. I have read this book many, many times. In it, we follow a precocious 11-year-old orphan who accidentally gets adopted by a brother and sister, Matthew and Marilla Cuthbert. Through scrapes and her talkative, imaginative nature, she weasels her way into the hearts of Matthew and Marilla, as well as the rest of the town of Avonlea. And it is just a lovely, heartwarming read in which I find myself smiling just about all the way through the story. Each time I read this, I find that I love Marilla, the character of Marilla, more and more. When I was younger, I loved Anne, and I still love Anne. But as I get older, I just really love Marilla. She had been hardened by life and is this older single woman. I relate to her. and Anne just finds a way to connect with Marilla in a way that no one ever has tried to do before. And Marilla just opens herself up more and more to love throughout the story. And I just love seeing that happen. It's so beautiful. This particular edition of Anne of Green Gables is published by Owl's Nest Publishing, which is a brand new publishing house as of about a year ago. And Katie from Life Between Words on Instagram is actually the editor of this edition. And it's special because in it, it has a few articles in the beginning, including a little biography of Ellen Montgomery's life, a discussion about the background of Anne of Green Gables and the different themes that are involved in the story. And then throughout the story itself, there are footnotes down at the bottom, which at first I wasn't sure I was going to like. I thought it would bring me out of the story. But I think especially because I've read the book so many times, I loved reading the footnotes. I felt like me and Katie were sitting down for a chat and she was just throwing in her 2 cents as we both read Anne of Green Gables. Sometimes it was definitions of older words that we don't use anymore. Sometimes it was cultural explanations of different things that are talked about in the story. And sometimes it's Katie's own personal reflections or memories connected to that part of the story. So I really came to love those footnotes, and it did feel very personal. I felt like Katie and I were chatting and she was just telling me all her little tidbits of information as we read. So I really loved this. If you are interested in this particular version, down where I link the books, I will make sure to link this particular edition if you're also interested in sitting down with Katie as you read Anne of Green Gables. Do I need to say that that was a 5-star read? It will always be 5 stars in my book. If you watch my vlogs, you know that often I get to go to botanical gardens that are in my area, and they have a little library in there that does a story time for the little dude that I watch, and there's also a nice play area. So sometimes while my little buddy is playing, I check out the books. And I found this graphic novel at the library at the gardens called Treasure in the Lake by Jason Pament. And I've never seen this or heard of it before, But I really enjoyed this graphic novel. First of all, I thought the illustrations were really, really lovely, but it's about these two friends. One of them is very content in their small town. One of them is very adventurous and cannot wait to get out of the small town. She's applied to a boarding school, even away. But they often go on walks in the woods outside of their village. One day while they're out walking, a little girl discovers a dried up creek bed. As she's walking along the dried up creek bed, she finds all these little artifacts of like silverware and little toys and such. And they keep walking along the creek bed and they discover something that's really special and surprising to me. And I just loved that adventure. And through it all, the friends get in quite a big fight. And there's also this look back at history, at what happened in this area previously, and they meet some other characters who were impacted by what had happened previously. I really thought it was really lovely and a surprise, and through what they discover and through these other people that they encounter, they find their way back to their friendship and a love for their town as well, which I think is really special. So I thought this was beautiful. I think I ended up giving it 4 stars. Yeah, I really enjoyed that. Then I read 2 books that continue some series that I'm reading. In December, I read Frostheart. I think in America it's Journey of the Frostheart. And then the sequel to that is called Escape from Aurora by Jamie Littler. And I really enjoyed this one as well. I think I didn't quite enjoy it as much as the first one, but it's just a fun adventure story. Our main character, Ash, is pictured here with his wild, crazy black hair. Ash is an orphan, but his parents may not be dead, and he's on a hunt to try to find them. He's also a song weaver, which in this world where he lives, song weavers are very much looked down upon, and he doesn't understand fully why. So he's on a hunt for his parents. He's on a hunt to kind of find out why song weavers are looked down on and the powers that they potentially might have. In the first book, he gets connected with the Frostheart, which is a ship that sails around to the different outposts, and it's like a found family in the first book, and this continues their adventure and continues his hunt to find his parents and continues to unravel what's so special about song weavers and little Ash in particular. So I really enjoyed it. I love the characters, and I love love the illustrations, which are plentiful. So while this is quite a chunky book, quite a few of the pages also do have some just brilliant, lovely illustrations on them that made this a book I definitely wanted to read in print rather than on audio. So I'm excited to continue with the third one. I do currently have the third one checked out in my library stack there. It's been overdue already. I had to renew it once. We'll see if I can get to it before it has to go back, but I do look forward to continuing this series. I think it's a fun, adventurous fantasy middle grade. I don't quite like it as much as Keeper of the Lost Cities, I will say that, but I am enjoying it. And the other middle grade series that I continued is Omar Rising. This is by Aisha Saeed. This is a companion sequel to Amal Unbound. In Amal Unbound, Omar is her best friend. And in this one, Omar has applied to go to this boarding school that is hard to get into. They live in Pakistan, and Omar comes from a poor family. His parents work for Amal's family. So he does not have a lot, and he applied for a scholarship at this boarding school and he was accepted. So this book is about Omar going to that school, meeting some friends, and finds out that scholarship kids are kind of looked down upon at that school, as you might expect. Sadly, the requirements and expectations for scholarship kids is quite different from everybody else, and it's not exactly fair, and Omar becomes determined to do something about it. So it's really kind of a beautiful story. Quick listen. I listened to this on audio, and I'm really glad that I did. I again think that I liked Amal Unbound a little bit better, but I did really like this one as well. I did read one book on my Kindle this month. Look at me. Last year, I only read one digital book, and already it's January and I've read a digital book. I read The Boy with the Bookstore, I think is the name of it. I forget the author's name. This is one of my NetGalley books, and sadly, I did not really care for it. I'm going to give it 3 stars because it did kind of redeem itself a little bit. But what really turned me off to the book at the very beginning is that the main character owns a bakery and her crush owns the bookstore right next door. I was told at the beginning of the story that she has had a crush on him for years, ever since they both opened their shops. And their first kind of major conversation turned into a heavy makeout session very early on in the book. And I was like, wait a minute. You don't know each other like that. You've barely talked to each other. Yes, your stores have been next to each other. He comes in all the time to get drinks from you at your bakery. But like, that was their first conversation. And then she's straddling him, and it's very descriptive of this heavy kind of makeout session. And I was just very taken aback. It does dial way back. And there are some big obstacles that they face as they attempt to start a romance potentially. But one of the big obstacles is that their landlord, who they both rent from, is going to remodel their space and kind of forces them to be in this other space that he has. That's a big kind of dark warehouse type of a space. And so now they have to share that as a bookstore bakery. And so it puts them in close proximity to each other. He's got a lot of stuff from his past, and he sometimes treats her so horribly. And some of the things that he says are just really unkind. And then she lashes back with one unkind statement, and just because of the nature of who she is, feels really horrible about it. I'm like, okay, right, maybe you shouldn't have said that, but you're kind of excusing all of these horrible things that he also just said. I didn't care for their communication. I didn't care for their romance because I didn't believe it. There was no buildup of chemistry. Even after they scaled back from that first scene, I just didn't care for that. I did love the family element of it. She is from the Philippines. It has some family issues that she has sacrificed some things in her own life to help her family. And I loved her family and that side of things. And I even loved the situation that the male protagonist had to deal with. It did bring a tear to my eye by the end. I wasn't like full on crying or anything, but it did have some things that I liked about it, which is why I decided a 3-star rather than a 2-star. Because at the beginning, I'm like, I don't even know if I can finish this. I don't know that I would recommend it. There was a bit of language in it, and there were some sexy time scenes that I had to skip through on the Kindle that I just didn't care about even at that point because of the way the relationship was built. I just didn't believe it. So yeah, I'm giving that 3 stars. It's not my favorite. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. However, if you are a romance lover and you don't mind insta-love, I do think there were some good aspects to the story. I just didn't believe their romance, and I didn't feel like I was given enough of a build-up for them to care about each other. There you have it. That's The Boy with the Bookstore. I did have a couple buddy reads this month. One of them was a nonfiction, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks by Rebecca Skloot. This I read with Mitzi Reads and Writes and Nikki from Red Dot Reads. I really loved those women and I loved reading with them. Unfortunately, I don't think I liked this book quite as much as they did. I am going to give this one 3.5 if I was giving half stars. And I think I am going to try half stars this year. So I'm going to give this one 3.5 stars. I did really like the personal story of Henrietta Lacks and the Lacks family and Rebecca Skloot's relationship with members of that family and how that was woven in all throughout this nonfiction read. However, I was so overwhelmed and lost with all the talk of cells and cell development and cell mutation and how cells were used for this, that, the other, even the ethical side of things. Some of that just kind of lost me. My brain got so overwhelmed by it. And then it would come back to this relationship or the family dynamics and how they were impacted by everything. And I was back into it again. So it kept like taking me out and pulling me back. There was a lot that I did really like. If you're not familiar, Henrietta Lacks was a Black woman who had a severe case of cancer. She was a remarkable woman and had a really rough upbringing. As she got a little older, had been dealing with cancer. And during one of her treatments, some tissue was removed from her that they ended up using those cells. And those cells became famous because they were remarkable in that these cancerous cells, they were able to replace them. Not replace them, but they were, I don't even know how to describe it, but those cells became very important, and many vaccines and advances in science are because of the cells of Henrietta Lacks. However, Henrietta Lacks nor her family were ever told anything about her cells being used for anything like that. So as these cells started to become more famous and there was different news stories and different things, the family did learn about it and they were taken aback and they did not really understand what was going on. And reporters were coming to talk to them and they just didn't fully explain things. Like all of that side of things, I really did enjoy. So there was a lot to enjoy in here. And I know many, many people really loved this one. I just got bogged down in the science. Like there's a lot of science in here. I didn't love it quite as much as I wanted. And I listened to it on audio, which I thought the narrator did a great job. But when I accidentally returned my audiobook to the library and then had to be put on a hold, and someone ended up finding it for me and sharing their library card with me so that I could get it again. For a couple days there, I was trying to read it in print, and every time I picked it up, within minutes, I was like conked down in my chair. It did not hold my attention at all in print. So that's something to consider as well. 3.5 stars. I am very glad that I read it, and it counts as my buzzword challenge book of the month because life is in the title, and I believe January was life and death words. So life is in the title, counts for that. So I'm glad that I read it. It's not staying on my shelves, but I am glad that I got to read with Mitzi and Nikki because I love those ladies. And then the other buddy read that I did was early on in the month, and I read Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik. I read this with April, one of my patrons, subscribers, friends, and April and I enjoyed reading Spinning Silver. I think I enjoyed this even a little bit more than she did. I think I was just in a fantasy mood. It had been a while since I kind of got enveloped into a fantasy world. And because this was so cold and blustery and wintry, and that is not the winter that I'm having here in Southern Virginia, our winter has been very, very mild. So it was really nice to just kind of curl up. I listened to this as well, but to curl up and listen to this wintry world that I was 100% here for the atmosphere and the story. In this book, we follow 3 different women, and then I think that a younger boy's perspective. So we have 4 perspectives that we get to hear from throughout the story. And I liked each of the 3 women's and their stories. However, the transition between perspectives was horrible. There is none. There's no transition. I don't need it to be announced. I mean, I guess it would be nice. The voice wasn't different on the audiobook. It always took me out of the story again because I had to focus like, wait a minute, did we just switch? It wasn't even chapter by chapter. Like sometimes within a chapter, it would switch perspectives, which just became really frustrating. And some of them had a little bit of overlap in what was going on in their stories. And so it just was really confusing. And at first I was enjoying it so much that I'm like, surely this is not going to be a problem. I will surely get the hang of this as the book goes on. No, it was a problem all the way through. But this is kind of a take on Rumpelstiltskin. One of the women that we follow is Miriam. Her father is a moneylender, but he's a little bit of a pushover. He's lended out lots of money and is not very strict about getting that money back. Now their family is struggling and her mom is sick, whereas all these other people in town are doing just fine. And so Miriam takes it upon herself to become the moneylender and get money back from people. And she is pretty harsh and strong about it and gets a reputation for turning silver into gold. She just is really good with money. She has a head for it. She is firm. She is fair. And she's not very gracious, which her parents are frustrated about. But it does well for them. They're able to get the mom the care that she needs. And unfortunately, though, there's this magical people called the Stariak. I don't know how to say it. The Stariak. And they live in kind of this alternate reality, winter reality. And it's been winter in this land. And everybody's blaming it on the Stariak, who are keeping the winter in the land because it helps them get what they want, blah, blah, blah. The king of the Stariak, or the lord of the Stariak, is what I think we called him. He hears about this woman who can turn silver to gold and shows up at her house with a bag full of silver and says, you have a certain number of days to turn this into gold, or I'm going to kill your whole family, ultimately. And she's like, what am I going to do? But she figures it out. She finds a way to do it, and that progresses. And so that's kind of a little bit of the Rumpelstiltskin tale. We never really learn his name, which is also like the whole importance of names is a big part of the Rumpelstiltskin story as well. So I liked that tie-in. We also follow just a couple other women in town who are forced into situations and relationships that they don't really want. But I loved by the end how even though these women were forced into these situations, they really kind of rose up and became more than what they could have imagined had their lives not been changed in those ways. The women in here were very strong and smart in different ways and creative and manipulative, if you will. But I really liked the focus on the three women. And I still really liked it. I think I ended up giving it 4 stars. I only knocked it down 1 because of the whole frustration with how it was told, but I still did really enjoy it. So that is Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik. I feel like I'm talking a lot. I did read a book off of my 12 books to read in 2023. I chose from the wheel. I got The Dove Keepers by Alice Hoffman, and I'm so glad that I finally read this. This is one that was pretty intimidating to me. The cover itself does not draw me in. I had not heard enough about it to know really what I was getting into. I knew it was historical. I knew it was set in the 1st century in Israel, and kind of is a fictionalized tale of what happened at Masada. So Masada is this fortress where one of the Herods built this big fortress up on a mountain in the southern part of Israel and lived there. But then in the 1st century, a group of Jews who were escaping from Roman takeover of the land, 900 Jews made it their fortress. And there was all of these storerooms and cisterns up there that Herod had set up for himself. And so these people were kind of living up in this fortress. Well, Rome eventually didn't care for that idea. And so that's the historical story that this is retelling in this historical fiction. And in it, we follow a number of different women who end up at Masada. We learn their backstory and how they're connected. And there was a lot that I really loved about this. There are two of the 3 women that we follow. 2 of the 4. I think there's 4 women that we ultimately learn about. But 2 of them have adulterous relationships, have children with these men who are already married. And so I didn't love the adultery aspect of it, but I think it's beautifully written. It was such an interesting time period to read about and just an interesting story. I really liked it. I gave it 4 stars and I'm glad that it's finally read and off my shelves. Off my TBR, I should say. All right, the next book that I have, the last 2 that I have are connected to my Patreon. I'm saving my Patreon book club for last. But my patron pick for the month of January was The True Love Bookshop by Annie Raines. And I loved kind of reading this the same month that I read The Boy in the Bookstore because there's a lot of similarity where a bookstore is a big part of the story. I liked this one so much better. So much better. In this one, we follow Tess, whose aunt has left her the bookstore and she runs it her own way. And we get to know this small town. Tess had been widowed 3 years previously to the events of this story. She had been married for just a few years when her husband died in a car accident. Very early on in the book, her husband's ex-best friend comes stumbling into the store from a camping accident. She is furious at him. She cannot stand him, says some horrible things to him, but also doesn't want him to die on the floor of her bookshop. So they call 911. And then we just kind of learn about why Tess is so angry with River and what River did and how it all plays out. Ultimately, there's a relationship between Tess and River. We find out things about the husband that she just didn't know. River is a PI. And River and Tess's relationship grew very slowly. And I just find that I love that. It's also a touch of hate to love at the very beginning, which is fun. Hate, but not horrible. They're not awful to each other. There's a specific reason why Tess is so mad at River, not just mean to be mean. And River is never unkind to Tess. He has always loved her. So I just really liked this a lot. I really liked this a lot. A lot of focus on grief and moving on beyond grief. A lot of focus on opening yourself up to love after having been hurt and having lost trust in people. How do we then trust again? And I just thought it was so much better written and more interesting than the first one. So I'm really glad that I read that. The True Love Bookshop. It was sweet. Finally, last book, book 13 of the month, is These Silent Woods by Kimmy Cunningham Grant. So early on in the month, I gave Anne of Green Gables 5 stars, and I gave These Things Hidden 5 stars, but then These Silent Woods by Kimmy Cunningham Grant. This is the first contender for a favorite of the year. While I did love These Things Hidden, I don't think I will remember it. I don't think it'll stick with me enough to be a contender for a favorite of the year. This one, potential for sure. These Silent Woods is the story of Cooper and his daughter Finch, who have lived isolated in the woods for 8 years. At the beginning, we have no idea why, other than little things that we start to learn along the way. The author does a great job of kind of peeling back that onion little by little. And at first I'm like, well, that doesn't seem like a good reason to be in the woods, because he'll say just part of the story. Anyways, Cooper and his daughter have a very close and loving relationship. There is a creepy man who lives on the mountain as well, named Scotland, who watches them very carefully, but is also kind of like a guardian angel. He provides meat when he can tell that they don't have enough food. He provides protection. He shows up just when it seems like he's needed. So there's always this question of, is Scotland a creepy man who lives on the mountain, or is he a guardian angel? I don't know. I also love how this book really does have some morally gray characters, both Cooper and Scotland. You just question them all the way through. Like, some of the choices that Cooper made were wrong, and yet also I found myself so endeared to him. It does have a slower pace at the beginning, but as the momentum of the story goes along, it goes faster and faster and faster. And by the end, it's action-packed, if you will. And I loved the ending. I found myself sobbing at the end, which is always a good sign for me. There were some very touching scenes and a choice made by one of the characters that blew me away. I thought it talked a lot about grace, about forgiveness, about just the choices we make and how that impacts our lives. And I just really absolutely loved this very much. And I thought the isolated, woodsy, wintry setting really reflected how Cooper, the main character, how he was kind of feeling isolated and stuff inside as well, like trying to protect his daughter, trying to protect their relationship. I really loved it. I really loved it. And we had such a great discussion on my Patreon about this book this month. I really appreciated the discussion as well, because not everybody loved it as much as me, and a handful of us really did love it. But there were a few people who really didn't like it. And I felt like we had a great conversation where everybody felt like they could express their opinions and feel respected and not shot down or you're wrong. Like, every opinion was valid and I could understand why they felt the way that they did, but we were able to have a really good back and forth discussion about it, which is just so lovely. It's just so lovely. So I'm going to put this one up. That's my favorite. All right. Here are all the books that I read in January. I was just thinking as I'm getting this stack together, what a great variety. I've got a children's classic. I've got some romance in there. Where did it go? This one and the other, kind of on the romance side, Happiness for Beginners. I've got some kind of literary suspense, if you will, with These Things Hidden and These Silent Woods. Got some middle grade down here, a graphic novel, a nonfiction, a fantasy, a historical from the 1st century. I mean, it doesn't get any better than this. I love it. All right, I gotta put that down. I just love it. I'm really excited to read like Keisha in February and so many others of my February TBR I'm really excited for. But that is going to be it for me today. I would love to chat with you about those books or anything else you want to talk about. I love chatting with you down in the comments. I really appreciate you for watching, for taking the time to hang out with me and being a part of this little corner of the internet. I would love for you, if you are interested in joining my Patreon and having some great book discussions like we did for These Silent Woods, I would love to have you consider joining my Patreon and joining us to read Murder at Mallowan Hall for February. All right, that's going to be it for me today. Thanks so much for watching. I will talk to you in another video very soon. Bye.